I want to get to Steven in Michigan. Hey, Steven, how's it going?
Hey, Dan. It's going well. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. What did you want to talk to us today about?
So I kind of mentioned, I was on the show like maybe a month ago. I called in and we talked about Snow is Black.
Yes.
I found out about that through this book, The Impact of Science on Society by Bertrand Russell. And I was wondering if you had ever checked that out at all.
I don't know if I've read that particular book. I mean, I've definitely read some passages in some of the writings of Bertrand Russell and stuff, and I've seen kind of the more mainstream stuff he's put out there, but I haven't sat down and read a text cover to cover.
Right. Yeah, no worries. I've got a quote right here in front of me from the book, and it's actually kind of interesting because it ties in a little bit to what you guys were just talking about, political figures trying to get creationism in the schools, whether they're sincere about it or for political gain or not, But this quote, it's kind of interesting, and I've kind of been keeping an eye out for it recently since this book was published, I think, in 1954. But the quote reads, "It may be hoped that in time, anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything if he can catch the patient young and is provided by the state with money and equipment." That's the first part of it.
Okay.
And it goes on later to say in the chapter, "Although the science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated." So it's got some kind of interesting implications, and the part that it's talking about in there is talking about mass influence and how to get ideas in the public and how to generate them in the minds of the people. And I was just wondering, I think about it on myself, what kinds of stuff was I showed or taught to try to be persuaded of as I grew up. I grew up in a Christian home. I think similar experience as you from what I've heard on the shows. Some of that stuff, looking back on it, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know about that. But yeah, I didn't know if you'd ever heard of anything like that, of people trying to just, persuade people of things, even if there's no actual basis.
For sure. Well, I'll tell you this. So some of you guys may know this, but what I went to school for, a concentration of part of my degree is communication. So the communication studies, and part of that background, I had to take classes on mass communication and actually the history of communication within the United States specifically, which is very interesting. And we got to see how communication models developed over time when it came to especially the mass movement of my ideas and kind of the invention of propaganda and how that kind of started in this country and how it's been used both for political gain and for, societal control in some ways, but also in capitalist forces as well, in trying to convince people to buy products and stuff like that. Religion, of course, historically, when it's big enough and when it has enough power, is great for getting that message across, especially if the base that you go to, I mean, if you're guaranteed to go to a place every single Sunday, right? The message just kind of spreads itself at that point. I mean, it's no secret that, especially if we're talking about the history of the Catholic Church and stuff, that there was kind of different people in powers at different times. The Catholic Church wanting one thing, that the secular rulers at the time wanting another, and they kind of battled it out and intertwined some of their messages to get stuff done. We're talking about the divine right of kings. We're talking about crusades to the Holy Land, right? Like, these are messages and these are concepts, frameworks for people to work on in order to accomplish kind of political goals. So, I mean, there's countless examples you can point to in history, and I'm sure Bertrand Russell was pretty keen on that. But I'm sure Alex could probably tell. I mean, you've probably looked at Bertrand Russell's works probably a bit more than I have, huh?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what Alex has to say.
Things like education. I think he got that from John Stuart Mill, who was actually Russell's godfather. I mean, he died. Mill, I mean, when Russell was one, but I suppose they technically kind of shook hands, if that can mean anything for a child. So it's strange to kind of see that history overlapping. But it's clear that he took a lot of influence from him. I kind of see Russell as a bit of a protege for Mill, clearly influence. And Mill's views on the subject were the same. It's like very much education is the way to change minds. He believed in the utilitarian principle, Mill, I mean, and he says, well, there's a whole chapter in his essay, how can we sanction this within people? How can we make people actually want to believe in it? Well, the answer is education. It's like we have to train minds in order to think in a certain way. And they were very positive. They had a very malleable view of human nature, as if to say, if you find the right rhetoric and you find the right way to bring people up, they can be convinced of anything. You can really talk them into anything. I don't know if I don't know if I share that view or not. I couldn't say, but what I can say is I don't know if I'm so optimistic about it. The idea, it's nice when you think, well, we can find out how to adapt and influence education such that we can teach people good ideas and have them truly believe in things like the utilitarian principle from a very young age and make it as intuitive as maths is to them. But if you give the power, if we uncover the true power of education that Russell and Mill thought existed, if it is true that we can really convince people of anything, well, if the state's in control of education, it's quite a scary prospect to think that we're giving the state the power to completely mold and shape the minds of the young. So when someone like Russell says, if you find the right way to do it, you can convince the young of anything, I don't see that as an exciting prospect. I see that as quite a dangerous one, and that's why I'm quite lucky to believe that I don't think human nature is quite as malleable. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. So just to add on to that, one of a model of communication theory is the hypodermic needle model. This was really popular, especially pre-World War II, when they were trying these ideas of just getting the message out there as plainly, as flatly as possible to people. And it was kind of discarded for a long time, according to my understanding of the scholarship, because it didn't have the effect on people that it really wanted. It's literally, the idea is just injecting the message to the masses so much that it's able to influence people. But we do find ways for that model now when it comes to like big data and stuff. We're noticing little tiny micro trends, and I mean, we're talking about Facebook advertising, we're talking about Google advertising that are now being customized towards you, just based on these little tiny things that we can track. So my point of going with all this is that if we're talking about religion in particular, I mean, religion markets to people all the time, and I don't think people realize this, especially if we're talking about the progress of social movements and how to understand different ideas. When I was growing up, when we talked about gay people, we talked about gay people in a fairly negative tone, as kind of an other, as kind of a group to be shunned. But there's a lot of churches now, and even when I was young, this was still happening, but there's a lot of churches now who are kind of framing that issue a little bit differently now. We're talking about people who are making a choice in their lives to do something outside of what they're doing, or it's something that God has maybe blessed them with a certain kind of struggle in their lives or something. These are kind of contrivances and explanations to explain why people are the way that they are and how they fit into kind of the previously established worldview. Before, there wasn't even these kinds of arguments because these people were so kind of shunned from society that it wasn't even a problem that people really had to deal with under less like closed doors and stuff. But now it's become so prominent that you're seeing more and more churches talking about it, more and more apologetics, and a division in churches, might I add, on how exactly to view the issue. So, I mean, there's always going to be marketing in any kind of groups like that. I mean, religious groups not excluded, but
you see how the culture has affected the marketing rather than the other way around. One of the reasons why the hypodermic needle theory has been thrown out by a lot of sociologists is because it seems on the surface that you look at where the media or advertising groups are promoting a certain image, and people seem to be following it. It seems to suggest that maybe people are being injected with ideas and taking them on. But then it occurs to people that it could be the complete other way around. It's like because people have taken on these ideas, advertising is the biggest industry in the world in terms of how acutely it recognizes social trends. So advertising molds to the social trends. It's not the other way around. It's not the advertisements that are injecting the population with views. It's the views of the population that are being sucked up by the advertisements, and they're making and that's where you see. Now that people have begun to stand up and say, well, actually, hold on, no, we're not standing up for this kind of homophobia. It's enough of that the churches finally go, oh, okay, let's put out an advert where we say, like, everybody's welcome kind of thing. Although I don't know if that's really the best kind of progress when people start talking about, like you say, there's people come up with arguments like, well, it's like it's an internal struggle. It's something they don't deal with. It's like they can be good people as long as they don't act upon their impulses. To me, that makes homosexuality a purely volitional action. It makes it something you do rather than something you are. I think most homosexuals feel as though their sexuality is part of their identity. It's not just something they do. It's not an activity. So when the church says, it might seem positive on the surface for a church to turn around and say, we accept you as long as you don't do what you want to do. It's like, this is more than what I want to do. This is who I am. So that doesn't really cut it.
You're also seeing churches now too, though, that I completely accept the identity idea of LGBT people and will even endorse their marriages and will like have some of the, I mean, I know it happens more in the UK than it does in the US for sure. But it's interesting because like, again, it's just bringing in different groups of people, approaching people with different messages to kind of, you know, get what they want across. And it's always going to happen as long as advertising exists, you know. Churches aren't, I mean, churches have, they don't make money in traditional ways that you might think in another business, but in some ways they are a business. They are an organization. They have methods of getting money from people, and sometimes they can be exploited to the detriment of people. And we were kind of talking about that last week as well with a caller that was calling in about a story that really broke my heart. I think that was last week, but the guy was saying that you know, like he felt like he was taken advantage of by his church community and stuff, and unfortunately that's just all too common, especially with the televangelist types, right? Oh, don't get me started. But anyway, so all that to say, Stephen, we went on some different roads there, but I mean, was that the conversation you were expecting?
I don't really have any expectations for conversations like this, but I enjoyed listening to both of you guys' talking points on that. Yeah, it was interesting.
Bertrand Russell. I was just gonna say Bertrand Russell's an interesting guy. Definitely, you guys should check out his work if you haven't already. Guy said some really crazy stuff for the time period he was living in. Stuff that I don't know if I'd had the bravery to say in terms of like talking about Christianity and stuff. So,
I see him.
I don't endorse everything he said.
His Why I'm Not a Christian, which is not technically one publication, but a series of essays, is like kind of the God delusion of its time, and also the history of Western philosophy that he wrote is like the go-to book on that topic. I see him as fulfilling in his time for atheism what someone like Peter Singer is filling now for like veganism. It's kind of not a household name, but people who know the subject and the philosophy around it recognize that he's one of these kind of originators, one of the people who was kind of saying it before it was popular. And when you look back, you think, damn, that guy had a lot of influence. We wouldn't have the Dawkins and we wouldn't have the new atheism and all of that without the influence of someone like Russell. I feel like that's kind of the position he holds. So he's definitely worth reading just as a historical figure.
For sure.
Agreed.
Well, thanks for bringing up that quote, Stephen. And I'm looking forward to you calling again, always bringing in the good stuff. Man, if you guys haven't watched it, you need to go back and watch that conversation about whether snow is black or not. That was a fun one. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thanks again, Stephen, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
Yeah, I'll hit you guys up in a while.
All right, take care. Cool beans. Yeah, really, it's really... It's really interesting to see comparisons between what churches do and what businesses do. Obviously, I was talking about that a lot, but like I've been kind of looking into it more recently, only because at least in the United States, you can't really get the same kind of records that you can for churches and how their kind of money flows as you can with a regular business, because these aren't publicly traded or anything like that. If you're on the church board, maybe you'll see the funds there, but there's a lot of kind of sketchy methods that happen sometimes with how those donations get in. So
and the worst comparison is the tax status,
right?
I think, and what can you do? Well, we don't really have the same. We don't have the same kind of problem in the UK because we are a Christian state. So people are very used to state subsidy or maybe not subsidy, but at least state explicit support of a certain religion. But in the US, it's like, I don't know about this. It's a no-go area.
So like if you ever campaigned ever in the United States to say, look, I'm going to tax the churches, you will never get anywhere. There's no way. It's just not in the public discourse. But isn't that interesting that in the UK, you have the public subsidy of churches, but in the US, you don't have that. But like churches are almost more profitable that way in the United States than they are in the UK, right? I mean, like I don't know how many mega churches there are in the UK. I guarantee there's more of them in the US though, huh?
I can't think of a single one. We had I think in London there are quite a few Pentecostal churches are quite big, like the kind of especially the kind of gospel churches that have the big congregations and the choirs and the modern instruments and stuff. They fill out big auditoriums with people who are kind of pseudo Christians. They go along because they want to feel something spiritual and they like the music and they sway. We don't have the same kind of super church. We don't have the guy in the pristine suit saying,
"Yeah,
you're going to heaven, buddy." We don't have it. You know, we don't have them going on Oprah. I don't even know what the UK equivalent of Oprah would be. It would be like Lorraine Kelly in the morning, and we don't have some super pastor going on there telling her how to conduct herself to get into heaven. It would just be unthinkable. We have like the contestants from Love Island or something instead.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna go back and take a clip of you saying you're going to heaven, buddy, and make that my text tone. So thanks for giving me that clip. Really appreciate that. I want to go to
get that on a t-shirt.
Get that on a t-shirt for sure.